Hey, fourth graders, it's Mrs. Seals back for our next science lab. So last week we started talking about slow changes to the land, specifically weathering, erosion, and deposition caused by wind, water, and ice. Today we're going to focus on how ice, specifically something called a glacier, can change the land through weathering, erosion, and deposition. So let's go ahead and get started. Target says I can observe and identify slow changes to Earth's surface caused by weathering, erosion, and deposition from ice. So before we continue, I want to make sure everybody remembers what weathering, erosion, and deposition are. Last week, I taught you this saying to help you remember. Weathering breaks it, erosion takes it, deposition makes it. Hopefully you have memorized that to help you remember the difference between those three processes. Weathering is when rocks are broken apart or worn down. Erosion is when those broken pieces of rocks called sediment are moved or carried away to a new place, maybe by water or wind, in this case ice. And then deposition is when those sediments are deposited or dropped off at a new place. So let's talk about what is a glacier. A glacier is a slowly moving mass or river of ice formed by the accumulation and compaction of snow on mountains or near the poles. So in places where it is very, very cold all of the time or most of the time, and it snows and snows and snows and snows, the snow underneath never has a chance to melt. It's not like the snow we saw here where it melted, a day or two later, because it's always very, very cold there and it always snows. So what happens is the snow underneath gets compacted or pressed down together into basically a solid block of ice. And glaciers are very, very large. They can be, the size of this school or bigger, and they move very, very slowly across the land. So you can imagine when you have a big, giant, chunk of ice moving slowly across the land, it definitely causes some changes. So glaciers can cause weathering, erosion, and deposition. Let's talk about how weathering can be caused by ice. We talked about this a little bit last week, but I just want to make sure you remember. This is called ice wedging. So when water sinks into cracks in a rock and the temperature drops low enough, the water freezes into ice. And the ice expands and forms wedges in the rocks that split the rock into smaller pieces. And when this happens over and over and over again, it causes the rock to split apart. So erosion is caused by ice because when glaciers cause erosion when sediment is picked up by a glacier. They freeze to the bottom of the glacier and are carried away by the flowing ice. Here are some pictures of the glaciers moving across the land. And in our experiment today, you're going to see this happening. You're going to see sediment sticks to the bottom of the glacier and gets carried away with it. And glacial erosion can create two landforms. It can create U-shaped valleys and something called a fjord. This is kind of a funny word. It's spelled F-J-O-R-D, but it's pronounced fjord. And we'll talk real quick about what a U-shaped valley and a fjord look like. So a U-shaped valley is exactly what it sounds like. It's a valley that is U-shaped. And it has steep, straight sides and a flat or rounded bottom, and it's created by glacial erosion. So remember, a valley is the space or the area between two mountains or hills. So when you see a valley like right here that is U-shaped, instead of more V-shaped, that is your clue that it was created by a glacier. So U-shaped valleys are created as the glacier slowly moved across the land hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, and moved or carried that sediment with it and left behind this U-shaped valley. A fjord is a narrow, long body of water that is very deep and has steep cliffs on 3 sides. The fourth side is an opening into the sea called the mouth of the fjord. Fjords are often found in valleys that are U-shaped because of the way they were created by glaciers. So U-shaped valleys and fjords kind of go together. You won't always see a fjord within a U-shaped valley. For if we go back to this one, like right here in this picture and this picture, these U-shaped valleys aren't filled with fjords, but sometimes they can be. Like in these 2 pictures here, we have the U-shaped valley that was created by the glacier, and then we have the river running through it, which is then the fjord. So deposition caused by ice. Glaciers deposit their sediment when they melt. They drop and leave behind whatever was once frozen in their ice. It's usually a mixture of particles and rocks of all sizes called glacial till. Glacial deposition creates a landform called a moraine. So as the glacier is moving slowly over the land, picking up and carrying sediment with it, eventually that glacier isn't going to go anywhere else. It's going to stop or it's going to melt. And then all that sediment that has been picked up and moved and carried with it is going to be deposited or dropped off. And that's what creates a moraine. A moraine is a mass of rocks and sediment carried down and deposited by a glacier, typically as ridges at its edges or extremities. So in these pictures, do you see, so this right here is showing where the glacier moved through the land. And this kind of ridge of sediment that is piled up, that's a moraine. So the moraine could be kind of a ridge between, on the edges of where a glacier had moved across, or it could be like in this picture, we see the glacier stopped right here, maybe it melted, and all of the sediment that has piled up right here and been deposited by the glacier has created that landform called a moraine. Okay, so today we're going to do an experiment to observe how glaciers changed the land. Hopefully you will be able to see this. I'll do my best. Right here, this green painter's tray is called a stream table, and we scientists use it to kind of model weathering, erosion, and deposition and landforms and things like that. And it is filled with soil, which is going to be, our land, our sediment. And I have made a little model of a glacier. So let me grab it out of the freezer really quickly. I didn't take it out before because I didn't want it to start melting. So let me grab it. I'll be right back. All right, so I have taken a little, paper cup and filled it with water. I put it in the freezer for several days, so this water is frozen. It's solid ice. This is going to be our glacier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of peel some off of the top to kind of expose the ice a little bit more. And there's my glacier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly move this glacier across my land, through my land, looking for examples of weathering, erosion, and deposition that are being caused as this glacier moves across the land. So I'm going to start right here up at the top. And glaciers move very slowly. They move only 1 or 2 centimeters per year. So I'm going to move my glacier very slowly, watching to see how my land is changing. I'm already definitely seeing some erosion, some deposition. All right. So let me hopefully you can see. All right, so I'm definitely seeing some erosion. Remember, erosion is when the sediment pieces get moved or carried away. So if I look at my glacier, first of all, I can see that some sediment has stuck to my glacier and been moved or carried along through the land with my glacier. That's one example of erosion. Another example of erosion is that look at how my land is shaped now. I've kind of created that U-shaped valley as my glacier moved through the land and kind of pushed sediment off to the side. It's created these ridges here where the sediment has been deposited. There's my example of the moraine. Also here at the bottom where my glacier stopped, I also have more examples of deposition where all of the sediment has been piled up. If I were to leave my glacier here and let it melt, you know what? This whole time I could have been not sharing my screen. I'm so sorry. Miss Seals. There, that's better for you to see. If I were to leave my glacier here and let it melt, all the sediment that is stuck to my glacier would also then be deposited. So lots of examples of erosion and deposition. I also see my U-shaped valley that my glacier created. If it were to be filled up with water, we would then call that a fjord. And then I have several different types of moraines. I have the sediment that has been pushed off to the side and deposited, creating these ridges. And then I have the sediment that's piled up here at the bottom that's been deposited, also a different type of moraine. So hopefully you can see different ways that glaciers can change the land. Remember that this is not a fast or a rapid change. This is a very slow process. Glaciers move just a couple centimeters a year. But they do change our land in many different ways. So I hope you had fun learning about glaciers and how they can cause weathering, erosion, and deposition. I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.